Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out early to hear my seminar. My topic today is servant leadership. You might ask, what does servant leadership have to do with you? By the end of this presentation, I hope I will have given you some possible answers to that question. I'm going to start with the definitions of servant and leader as individual words, then bring them together to discuss servant leadership. Here are some definitions of a servant. One who is privately employed to perform domestic services. One who is publicly employed to perform services as for a government, a civil servant. One who expresses submission, recognizance, or debt to another. Now for some definitions of a leader. In general, the role of a leader is to coach, guide, and inspire others. A leader is someone who can see how things can be improved and rally people to move toward that better vision. A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. True leaders genuinely care about others and have a desire to serve. They consider it a high honor and responsibility to serve those they are privileged to lead. Robert K. Greenleaf coined the term servant leadership in his seminal 1970 essay, The Servant as Leader. According to Mr. Greenleaf, the first and most important choice that a leader makes is to serve, without which one's capacity to lead is severely limited. He also believed that a good society has to be dominated by the servant idea. The servant leadership concept has had a deep and lasting influence over the past few decades on many modern leadership ideas and practices. This concept, brought to awareness by Mr. Greenleaf in 1970, has been around for a very long time. It's a principle Yeshua spoke of when he walked with his disciples. He shows us a beautiful example of servant leadership in John 13:12 through 17. John 13:12 through 17. When he, Yeshua, had washed their feet and taken his garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." Luke 22:25 through 27. Luke 22:25 through 27. And Yeshua said unto them, "The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors. But you shall not be so. But he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger. And he that is chief, as he that does serve. For whether is greater, he that sitteth at meat, or he that serveth? Is it not he that sitteth at meat? But I am among you as he that serveth." Matthew 23:11. Matthew 23:11. He who is greatest among you shall be your servant. Normally, I think of a leader in a formal position of leadership, which can last a long time. I want to take a look at servant leadership in a slightly different light. Let's look at servant leadership where someone leads a group for a shorter amount of time in ways we don't normally think of as leadership. This broader definition may give us a different perspective. So let's look at influence. How does influence play a part in leadership? Influence is defined as the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something. It's the ability to persuade someone to think or act in the way we want. Are we supposed to influence others? Matthew 5:14 through 16. Matthew 5:14 through 16. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hid. Nor do men light a lamp and put it under a bushel, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. The ability to influence others is an essential part of leadership. I feel when we are able to influence other people, we are in a type of leadership role during that time. Leadership can last for different periods of time. We as parents are leaders for our children. Ron and Cynthia are leaders for our group. If anyone heads up a project like Keith and Diane are in helping our group participate in First Steps Back Home, that's a leadership role for that situation. Someone who speaks in front of the group is in a position of influence. Since everyone is allowed to comment during our normal services, we are all influencing each other. What about people in our life we try to influence for the better? We talk to others about God. Acts 1, verse 8. Acts 1, verse 8. But you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. How often do we influence others? I believe we influence others much more than we may realize. Even in our absence, people think about what we said or did, and we are having a positive or negative impact on them. That's why we are admonished to let our light shine by following Yeshua's example. Have you ever had anyone tell you that something you said or did changed something they were doing for the better? Maybe you were very surprised, unaware of what the person saw you do or heard you say that changed them. A lady in a church I attended half a lifetime ago told me one day that she watched me. I was shocked. She didn't elaborate on how it affected her, but it seemed positive. I was involved in different activities the church did, totally unaware that someone was watching my actions. It was also very revealing as a parent, as my children started imitating my words and actions. It reminds me of the song, I Want to Be Like You, God, because my child wants to be like me. There's a quote on my vision wall that says, your life is your message to the world. Make sure it is inspiring. Our life is to be a light as we walk this earthly journey. We are to follow God's principles of loving and serving others. As followers of God, our presence on earth is to influence and make a positive difference in the lives of others, as well as we are to learn and grow as individuals. While we are not necessarily seeking a leadership position, we may find our actions of loving and giving to others put us in a leadership role. Robert Greenleaf came to the idea of the servant as leader from reading Herman Hesse's book, Journey to the East. Here are some of Mr. Greenleaf's comments about the book. The book is about a mythical journey of a band of men, with the central figure of the story being Leo. He accompanies the party as the servant who does their menial chores, but who also sustains them with his spirit and his song. Leo is a person of extraordinary presence. All goes well until he disappears. Then the group falls into disarray and the journey is abandoned. They cannot make it without the servant Leo. The narrator, one of the party, after some years of wandering, finds Leo and is taken into the order that had sponsored the journey to the east. There he discovers that Leo, whom he had known as servant, was in fact the head of the order. He was its guiding spirit and great and noble leader. This story makes a very true point. It clearly emphasizes that the great leader is seen as servant first, and that simple fact is the key to his greatness. Leo was actually the leader all the time, but he was servant first because that was who he was deep down inside. Leadership was bestowed upon Leo, who was by nature a servant. This leadership position was something given, or assumed that could be taken away. His servant nature was the real man, not bestowed, not assumed, and not to be taken away. He was servant first. Leadership is bestowed on a person who is by nature a true servant. People love to follow leaders who are servants. Here's a list of the most common characteristics of servant leaders. They are accountable. Number 2, they are good listeners. 3, trustworthy. 4, have humility. 5, self-awareness. 6, empathetic. 7, they have foresight. 8, they have a vision and inspire vision in others. 9, they are healers. 10, they are good stewards. Each of these traits could be a seminar on its own, but I'm going to briefly discuss each one. Accountability is an acceptance of responsibility for honest and ethical conduct toward others. Biblical accountability begins with taking responsibility for one's own actions and making a conscious choice of allowing God and others to help in accomplishing what is right. Josh McDowell talks about this in his book, How to Be a Hero to Your Kids. I read this book when my children were very young, and it had a great impact on my parenting. I kept the book all these years, and I read it again before preparing this presentation. I was once again impressed by the information. Josh tells how he made himself accountable to his wife and kids. He asked his wife to hold him accountable as a husband and father, to tell him if he wasn't spending enough time with her and the kids or was not meeting their needs. She agreed reluctantly, concerned it could hurt his feelings. He told her that even if he got defensive, he wanted to hear the truth. When each of his kids reached the age of 7, he wrote them a note, told them he loved them, and he wanted to be the best dad he could be to them. He asked them to tell him if they thought he wasn't being fair, loving, or considerate of them. By doing this, his wife and kids became his counselors. Here is one of his examples. Josh and his son Sean were walking down the street when a man stopped to talk to Josh. Something the man said irritated Josh, and he was rather short with the man. As the man walked away, Sean remarked, "Dad, you were very short with that man. You didn't talk to him very nicely." Josh said, "I felt like dying right there on the street." They ran after the man, and when they caught up with him, Josh stopped him. With his son standing right beside him, he apologized for his rude behavior. Josh says sometimes the critiques his family gives him stings, and he gets defensive. But when he does, they clam up, and there goes his greatest source of insight and help. He mentioned beside having his pride hurt and getting defensive now and then, there are other dangers he finds in being accountable to his family. One example is being criticized by people outside his family. The Christian man is seen as the authority figure and a strong leader for his family. Then how can he let his wife and children challenge him? Josh says, "I simply tell my critics that I believe I am a servant leader who is strong enough to be able to say to Dottie, his wife, and the kids, I want you to hold me accountable. If I'm not cutting the mustard in your eyes, let me know." Josh believes a leader is the one who is strong enough to say, "Help me. I need your help. I want to be all that God wants me to be as a husband and father to my family." The servant leader listens to his family and is always more concerned about relationship than rules. The real secret to authority is a servant's heart. This is a prerequisite to being a servant leader. Here's one definition of having a servant's heart: to not only put others' needs ahead of our own, but to serve with the right motivation. That's to put God's will first. Rewards, recognition, or even gratitude cannot be the motivation to live out true servanthood the way Yeshua did. To be a servant leader the one in authority, must know what it is to be loved, to have both a sense of security and significance, because he or she is accepted and appreciated, beginning with God's grace. I think it is a courageous act of love to ask your mate and kids to keep you accountable. This quote is from Simon Sinek. Leadership is not about being in charge. Leadership is about taking care of those in your charge. The second trait is being a good listener. Hearing and listening aren't the same. We hear music, the sound of rainfall, the traffic on the road. Listening requires attention, understanding the message that's being relayed, and recollection of what's being said. We can serve people better if we make a deep commitment to listen intently to them and understand what they are saying. To truly listen, I must give you my undivided attention. I need to put my agenda aside, put the phone down, turn the TV off, or close the book. Listening strengthens and deepens relationships. It demonstrates attentiveness, caring, and respect. I'm going to discuss 3 types of listening that are helpful for anyone, but especially someone who wants to be of service to others. Number 1 is active listening. This takes concentration. It demonstrates our interest in the other's views, gains their trust, and enables us to gain a deeper understanding of issues and situations. It includes observing the verbal and nonverbal messages being sent. As a listener, we can paraphrase and summarize to show the speaker they have been heard and that we are paying attention. This also clarifies what they said and allows the speaker to let us know if we haven't understood correctly. Number 2 is listening to understand the other person's point of view. Maybe they are upset with us. Listening does not necessarily mean we agree with what the speaker is saying. We can accept the person and acknowledge what they are saying without accepting their behavior or point of view. Stephen Covey talks about this listening principle and calls it first seek to understand before being understood. First seek to understand before being understood. If we are willing to listen to another person until they are satisfied that we really understand their position, then after they feel heard, they are more likely to listen to our point of view. A good listener will keep the conversation focused on the topic of discussion and use the 80-20 rule. 80% listening, 20% talking. Charles Stanley recounted a family meeting in a tape series called How to Keep Your Kids on Your Team, which I also heard when my kids were young. This was also information that affected how I raised my kids. Charles Stanley opened up the opportunity for his family to say whatever they wanted to tell him without defending himself. I thought that was a great example and took courage on his part. As a well-known minister, he humbled himself to ask and listen to what his family had to say. The third one is therapeutic listening. This can be allowing a friend, a colleague, or a family member to discuss their problems. It involves using supportive, nonverbal cues, such as nodding and maintaining eye contact, in addition to empathizing with their experiences. There is something very healing about being allowed to talk without interruption and feel we have been heard. It validates us as a person and lets us know we matter to someone else. So now, number 3 of the characteristics of being a servant leader is being trustworthy. Servant leaders act with integrity. They are honest. The full meaning of the word integrity means whole or undivided. Servant leaders act the same outside the office, home, or church as they do inside those places. Albert Einstein once said, "I speak to everyone the same way, whether he is a garbage man or the president of the university." By doing this, he demonstrated genuine respect for all people. Respect defines the underlying attitude of a servant leader. Another aspect of being trustworthy is keeping our word, doing what we say we will do. When we make a commitment, people know it will be done, if at all possible. There are times we will make mistakes because we're human. When we realize it, we own up to the mistake and correct it. We make amends to the people affected by it. I'm going to briefly connect this to a biblical principle called restitution. It's found in both Old and New Testaments. One example is Exodus 22:5. Exodus 22:5. When a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed over, or lets his beast loose, and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best in his own field and in his own vineyard. In the New Testament, the account of Zacchaeus is in Luke 19:1 through 10. Luke 19:1 through 10. I'll read Luke 19 verse 8. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. In order to heal a relationship we have damaged, we make restitution. We do what it takes to restore it, to make things right again. In some cases, we go the extra mile beyond just making it right and bless the person beyond what we owe him. Now back to trust. Trust between individuals creates psychological safety. An example would be between a parent and a child. The child should not be afraid that something he says or does will make the parent stop loving him. He knows he will be disciplined for bad behavior, but he feels secure in their love. Within a safe space of trust, people can be loved and validated as valuable. This boosts self-confidence and encourages more trust and vulnerability. Being vulnerable means being in a position where other people can hurt us. It often means expressing the sides of ourselves where we have the least confidence and allowing others to respond to those weaknesses. Trust facilitates meaningful connections, and it is the backbone of healthy, happy relationships of all kinds. When we know a person respects, loves, and cares about us, it is much easier to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is what fosters authentic, close connections. With each experience that proves a person's trustworthiness, others feel more comfortable and safe. So the fourth characteristic is humility. Humility is the ability to view ourselves accurately as an individual, with talents as well as flaws, while avoiding arrogance or low self-esteem. Humility should not be confused with a lack of self-confidence or insecurity. Quite the contrary. Confidence and security are often displayed most authentically through humility. Humility binds leaders and followers together. It inspires followers to trust leaders. Servant leaders do not see themselves as better than or above those who follow them. The servant leader is first among equals. Great loyalty comes when followers feel the leader is one of us. C.S. Lewis stated, "Humility is not about thinking less of yourself. It is about thinking of yourself less." Servant leadership emphasizes the responsibility of a leader to increase ownership and autonomy and responsibility of the followers, to encourage them to think for themselves and try out their own ideas. Here's an example for us. Ask how we can help our employees, our mate, or our kids do their job better, and then listen. The effects of this approach can be powerful. Number 5 is self-awareness. Some sources say that 99% of people believe they are self-aware. But unfortunately, only 10 to 15% actually are. Harvard Business Review lists 2 main types of self-awareness, internal and external. Internal self-awareness includes knowing our thoughts, our feelings, our strengths, weaknesses, core values, priorities, passions, and desires. Reflection and introspection help us see ourselves more clearly and objectively. We understand how we affect the environment and those around us. External self-awareness has more to do with being aware of other people and how they see us, our strengths, weaknesses, values, passions, and aspirations. If our external self-awareness is high, we are better at seeing other people's perspective and showing empathy. If we can manage our own emotions, we are more likely to exert a more positive impact on the emotional vibe of a family, a work situation, or a social encounter. People who are self-aware do not sell themselves short, but also do not have an overinflated view of themselves. They want honest feedback on how they are coming across and how they are doing. They have confidence in knowing their strengths and weaknesses. They do not mind sharing the spotlight and lifting others up. To become more self-aware, we need to learn to be comfortable in our own company, to be able to see the positives and negatives about ourselves, and take time to reflect. Do we have the courage to ask those we are close to and who love us the most to give us honest feedback about how we come across? We could start with something small like, do I interrupt you when you talk to me? If we could ask for feedback and be willing to listen to the response, I think it would help us greatly with our personal growth. Here are a couple of questions I've asked myself to become self-aware. What is it really like for those who interact with me? How would I feel having someone treat me the way I treat those I am closest to? I like this quote from Veronica Tugaluva. To know yourself, you must sacrifice the illusion that you already do. Number 6, servant leaders show empathy. So what is empathy? It's the ability to understand another person's thoughts and feelings in a situation from their point of view rather than our own. What is the difference between empathy and sympathy? I like Brené Brown's explanation of the difference. She defines sympathy as seeing someone in a deep hole, but remaining on higher ground and talking to them from above. The sympathetic person may also try to put a silver lining on the other person's situation instead of acknowledging the person's pain. Conversely, empathy is feeling with the person. It's climbing down in the hole to sit beside them, becoming vulnerable to sincerely connect with them. This reminds me of the verse in Romans 12:15. Romans 12:15. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. The empathetic person will recognize the person's struggle without minimizing it. By learning to empathize with those around us, we build stronger relationships and trust. Psychologists Daniel Goleman and Paul Ekman have identified 3 components of empathy: cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. Here are brief descriptions of the 3 components. Number 1, cognitive, is simply knowing how the other person feels and what they might be thinking. One example, a friend calls to tell you she lost her job. You know she is likely to be feeling sad and anxious. She relies on her income to pay her bills. Having only cognitive empathy keeps us at a distance from our friend. To truly connect with her, we need to share her feelings. This is where emotional empathy comes in. Emotional empathy is when you feel physically along with the other person, as though the emotions were contagious. This kind of empathy can also extend to physical sensations, which is why we may cringe when someone else stubs their toe. With the friend who lost her job, we would look inwards to identify a situation where we similarly were anxious about the future. The situation may not be identical, but what's important is that the emotions resulting from the situation are the same. After we have successfully understood what our friend is feeling and put ourselves in a similar emotional space, now what? We move to number 3, compassionate empathy. With this kind of empathy, we not only understand the person's predicament and feel with them, but are spontaneously moved to help if needed. It is the balance between cognitive and emotional empathy that enables us to act without being overcome with feelings or jumping into a problem-solving process. A 2016 study from Massachusetts General Hospital found empathy to be the distinguishing factor in medical care satisfaction. Previous studies have shown that empathy can also affect healthcare outcomes and can reduce the length of hospital stays. So I'm going to end this section on empathy with a quote from Rochelle E. Goodrich. "Walk with me for a while, my friend. You in my shoes, I in yours, and then let's talk." I'm going to repeat that. "Walk with me for a while, my friend. You in my shoes, I in yours, and then let's talk." Number 7 is foresight. Foresight is a characteristic that enables the servant leader to understand the lessons from the past, the realities of the present, and the likely consequences of a decision for the future. Foresight is recognized as a universally effective leadership attribute. Without developing this characteristic, the possibility of making unnecessary errors increase, resulting in the future of individuals, organizations, and even whole societies being negatively affected. Decisions aren't foolproof, and it will take time, courage, and encouragement to develop foresight. To gain foresight, it is helpful to seek counsel from others, interact with people different from us in age, gender, race, worldview. With their diverse perspectives, they might see something coming that we missed. We can read about the subject relevant to the decision. It's important to listen to our intuition as we think about our choices. Pray for guidance about what to do next. Only God knows what tomorrow holds. Number 8, the servant leader has a vision of where the group is headed. He or she has the ability to inspire vision in others. John 14:12. John 14:12. "Verily, verily, I, Yeshua, say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do, shall he do also. And greater works than these shall he do, because I go to the Father." What a vision he had for those of us who follow him. We can develop a vision or mission statement as an individual, a family, a church, or a company. The mission statement describes the individual or group's purpose, what goal is being worked toward, and what is to be achieved. A personal mission statement can be a 1 or 2 sentence motto that shows how we define ourselves as a person or a team member. It identifies and presents why this is important to us. Or the mission statement can be a paragraph that encapsulates everything we would like to be, do, and have in our life. It defines what success and excellence look like to us. Most of you know my story about how I came to have a vision wall that holds quotes, sayings, and photos of what I want to become. It has now become my vision room. I've been aware of mission statements for a very long time through Stephen Covey's writings and presentations. I never thought of my vision wall as a quote, or a wall of quotes, as my mission statement until I was preparing this presentation. In the center of the wall, I have what I would now call my mission statement: be, light, and love. Each capital letter is size 8.5 by 11 inches. It's the focal point of my vision wall. The word be is in red for being passionate about who I want to be. Light is in yellow. I want to reflect the light of God. Each letter in love is a different color because I love God, people, and things in different ways. The entire vision wall reminds me of my mission every day. Helen Keller said, "The only thing worse than being blind is having sight with no vision." Proverbs 19:18, Part A. Proverbs 19:18, Part A reminds us, where there is no vision, the people perish. We need to know where we are going. A leader and those who follow him or her must know where they are headed. Number 9, the servant leader as a healer. This characteristic relates to the emotional health and wholeness of people and involves supporting them physically, mentally, and spiritually. Healing leaders empower their teams by providing opportunities for everyone to have a voice, giving credit where it is due, or making it possible for people to share their ideas more widely. To be a healer in this capacity is to be an expert in being careful with another's pain. It is a willingness to reach out and be supportive of those who are hurting. Leaders bear their own wounds and scars. To help others heal, they need to attend to their own healing first. Healing involves being able to resolve issues and conflicts. The healing of relationships is a powerful force for transformation. To authentically care about others is vital. A quote from Maya Angelou says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel." Number 10, the last characteristic is stewardship. Stewards engage others through relationship building, personal influence, teamwork, communication, and role modeling. They pay active attention to the overall health and well-being of those they care for. It can be a family, a church, a group, team members in a job, etc. The servant leader is in a position to serve those under his or her influence. At an individual level, stewardship focuses on promoting the development and well-being of each person in the family or group. These individuals are helped to achieve their goals. A servant leader sees the people in the group not as they are today, but their potential. The individuals are more important than the task. Stewards lead by example, by demonstrating the values and behaviors they want. You may have heard the quote, "Be the change you want to see in others or in the world." Servant leaders have the confidence also to stand up to people when they act in ways that do not align with good values and principles. They use persuasion rather than authority to encourage people to action. If persuasion is used correctly, it does not damage relationships or take advantage of others. Servant leaders are willing to hear ideas and input from others and to actively seek feedback. They encourage people to take responsibility for their work and remind them how what they do contributes to the success and overall objectives of everyone involved. Here are 3 questions to evaluate the success of stewardship. Number 1, are those being served growing as persons? 2, are they becoming healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous? And 3, are they more likely themselves to become servants? Servant leadership is a win-win situation. I really like this next quote by Sheryl Sandberg. Leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. So leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. There's overlap in these 10 characteristics. One attribute builds on others. There are many Bible verses that encourage us to incorporate these traits in our lives. They are all based on love and following Yeshua's example. I think the following verses are a good foundation for having a servant's heart, and should the situation arise, becoming a servant leader. Matthew 22:37 through 40. Matthew 22:37 through 40. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. I hope I've presented enough information from the biblical accounts and other examples to show we are to be servants. And because of that, we can find ourselves in the position of servant leaders, even if we don't feel like a leader and don't think people look to us as leaders. Here's a quote from Martin Luther King. Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. So I'm going to read again Matthew 5:14. Matthew 5:14. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hid. Galatians 5:13. Galatians 5:13. For you were called to freedom, brethren, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love be servants of one another. 1 Peter 4:10. 1 Peter 4:10. As each has received a gift, employ it for one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Mark 9:35. Mark 9:35. And he, Yeshua, sat down and called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. Yeshua is our personal servant leader. He gave the ultimate sacrifice when he came to show us the way to God, loved us unconditionally, gave us a vision to work toward. His influence and support continue without being present in human form. John 14:12 and 13. John 14:12 and 13. I'm reading 12 for the second time. Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I go to the Father. And I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. We have a mission to become like our servant leader, Yeshua, to be the light of the world, spreading the love of God. So, I'll open it up for comments.
I got a lot to work on.
Well, we're all thinking. Thanks,
Yes,
Cheryl.
Kevin?
I think applying that requires some time where you can be involved with listening to somebody and talking to them at that time. But then you gotta take don't say too much. Go back and think about what they said and then offer again. Find out again, well, how's this going? And then offer what you thought about, if you think it would be something that would benefit them. Sometimes it really is that listening and not and trying to understand. And the one thing in there, the emotion part of it, I just feel like emotion, you can empathize and just say, I know how you feel. And maybe offer something that you've been through to show that you do know. But then move forward with more the constructive type stuff that, well, maybe this would help. Or, well, did you try that? Maybe that would be a different way to work it out. So anyway, I was just, so much of what you said, I was thinking, what happens when I talk to my sons, and when they do come with questions or happenings, sometimes it's just events, sometimes they're actually looking for a solution. And I was trying to think what I could take from what you said, and it was there were a lot of things that were very helpful in your presentation.
Yeah, this is a tall order to fill all these things, and it's a process. That's why it's a mission statement. This is my goal. This is not where I'm at. And so just looking at some of these principles and tweaking some to keep getting better and to being able to be a better servant to others. Yes, Jean?
I find myself wanting to fix everything. I'm going to fix it, whatever it may be. And it's mostly with my family. So I don't take the necessary steps to let them fix themselves. I appreciated that you were mentioning the family and friends and fellowship and people you meet, because as these things are going through my mind, what steps do I take in order to release some of my leadership I'm the matriarch of the family. So it's hard for me to let go of things and let people grow in their own selves. And that's not being a good leader whenever you try to take the bull by the horns and orchestrate everything, or give them a resolution, or how they can solve this thing. And sometimes I think I have too many recommendations rather than letting them think it out themselves. You know, and that's really not, you're not leading, you're directing. And so I appreciate the steps that you included, and I'm gonna have to work on that, like I said, but I think it's more of a personal basis with my family, of letting go from being the person that made all the decisions and told them when they could be at certain times and what they could do. And almost everybody's a semi-adult. Naomi's going to be 16, and I have to step back, and I have been doing that with her, and we're getting along much better because I have become basically a leader rather than a director. But I appreciate of the things that you shared with us, because I think they're valuable steps in life to get where we want to go.
Thank you. Yeah, it's easy to go into fix-it mode, especially if you've had the experience and you think about, it's like, you just say, well, this is the answer. But they don't learn and grow. I mean, it's not that if it's really serious, you want to step in and help. But if it's something they need to learn and grow in, even though you might see the solution, they have to come to that themselves. They have to own it. And they have to experience it.
I got a lecture on listening from Diane and Cynthia probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I know it's been quite a while, but Diane did the talking, and Cynthia was sitting right, I know you remember it, right next to her, nodding the whole time. If it had been one or the other, I mean, I would have never thought Diane would have told a lie. I would have just thought it was her opinion. But it was all about, because she was talking about like having problems and just listening, because I couldn't imagine her having a problem and telling Keith and him not thinking of solutions. Okay, like you were saying, but it was just, sometimes you just need to listen. And she did all the talk, and Cynthia was sitting right beside her going like this the whole time, and I thought, I can't imagine, because I used to be married. If my wife had a problem and was telling me about it, I'd be thinking of solutions. You know, but sometimes just listen and let them work, like you said, let them work it out themselves is the best way.
I got a good example. Naomi volunteers for everything under the sun, and she sat down in the car one night when I picked her up after school, but she stays every night of the week. And so I picked her up and she said, I'm just exhausted. Well, she belongs to 5 different committees, and she's on the student council, and she's on track, and she's a scoreboard person for the senior varsity team for basketball, and the scorekeeper for the varsity volleyball. Okay, so this has all gone on just in 3 months' time. And she sat there and she said, and I was so, I just wanted to say, you're adding too much to your plate. You know, I asked you guys to all pray about that. Well, when I finally let go of it, she said, I'm just doing too much. But it was her decision, and I was pretty much constantly trying to tell her, you know, you don't need to do everything every night of the week. And I just gave up on that. And she came to her own resolution, you know, this is too much. So she says, I gotta back off because my studies are the most important. And so I still pick her up every night of the week, but it's still, she's maintained what she had, she hasn't added anything else to it. And to me, that's when I released my directorship and started being a leader.
Sometimes if we're allowed to just talk it out, we can see the solution ourselves. It just hearing yourself talk about it makes a big difference. Yes, Joel?
I like a lot about what you said about listening. You gave that 80-20 split there, you know. I mean, I've always had it in my head, God gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth. I would spend twice as much time listening as I do speaking. I feel a lot better off. But the 80-20 is even better. A lot of times a few words can mean a lot, you know, where, like many here, I mean, I have trouble with wanting to fix things for people when they confide in me too, but that's not for me to do. I mean, I might tell them some similar situation and maybe I had been in, you know, but you just use a few words and let people go on their own.
I think it was Diane and Kevin, but Diane.
Yeah.
Well, I was looking at the bullet point of self-awareness, and I was wondering how they measure something like this to be able to determine the 10 to 15%. Only that many of us. Do you know, Cynthia?
All right, so just from Ron and my experience of doing Career Direct with people, and they've taken the assessment, and it's all, the assessment is all their thoughts, right? We have only had one person who was able to tell us their top 3 personality factors, strongest personality factors, in order. That's Shirley. Shirley's the only one who was able to do all 3 of them in order. I just did a consultation this last week, and the kid was so off. He didn't have any idea what his strongest personality factor was, and neither did his parents.
Who you would think would have some in
Inside.
order to guide him.
Right.
Right. Well, I don't know why, but at this moment, that just seems like the most important characteristic, because if you don't have that internal or even the external self-awareness, then your perception of what's going on around you could be skewed,
Yes.
right?
I think that very much connected with that is humility, and I really like the definition that it's not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less.
Right.
It's not that you are denigrating yourself, it is being accurate in your skills and abilities. And I think that there are too many people who have been told, well, you know, don't toot your own horn, don't tell anybody, but you have to accurately be able to say, I'm good at this. I'm good at that. This is what I like to do. This is what I don't like to do. And if you can't do that accurately, then you're handicapping yourself.
Well, and then to me, you're not really allowing yourself to be an authentic leader in whatever position.
Right. Or authentic or useful tool to God either.
That was a good question. I read that, but they didn't give the how that they came to it. So but I thought of Career Direct as soon as you asked that, for helping people to figure that out.
I was just talking to a middle-aged friend the other day. He and his wife are both middle-aged, and they're both in their second marriage. It's been a little over a year, and he says they're having trouble he says it doesn't make any difference what I say, it's what she hears me say. You know, they're just having trouble speaking the same language. I don't know that she's looking for esoteric meanings in what he says, but he feels like he's speaking plainly, but she's not hearing what he's thinking.
Yeah.
You know, and that's common. It's common. It's more common than you think. You know, that's
Yeah.
real common. Yeah.
What's the title of this again?
What I gave? The servant leader.
Okay. Now, okay, that's what Jesus says we should be. Now, let me ask you, how many people think narcissists make good leaders? It can't happen because people, you know, somebody is only wanting to be a leader for their own purposes.
Right.
People are not going to follow them unless they're maybe really just not thinking, you know. They're not, eventually they're going to fall away too. We had a couple people at the men's retreat who, I don't even know who they were, but most everybody there was fine, great, no problem. But there were a couple people, it was just like all about them. And it was funny that you are speaking on this, because this was just the last meeting on the Sunday morning. 2/3 of the people had to leave after Sabbath evening. And this one guy was going on, and I said, if you want to be a leader, you've got to be a servant. And I shut him up. He wasn't interested in being a servant. He just wanted to tell people what they ought to do based on himself. So anyway, we have to kind of recognize that when we see it. And don't allow, if you're with other people, don't allow them to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, this person's got all the answers, because you got to really be just what you were talking about. That's the type of leaders we want.
Yeah. Oh, Jeannie?
I kind of tuned into that part where you said that people won't follow a narcissist, well, they follow Hitler. And he was a true narcissist. The point is, in narcissism, yes, they are very selfish, they're very controlling, but they study other people to manipulate, to make them think that they're representing them. And that's a little bit different, so I would have to disagree with people don't follow narcissists, they do it all the time. But people of faith really understand what's going on, and you won't follow them very long, because they'll reveal themselves. But they are only in it for their own purposes. They're not a servant.
The
They'll
ones
pretend to be a servant. You know.
I kind of think the ones who might fall in line with the narcissist are the ones who are after the same thing that person's, talking about. They empower. This is a way for power. But most people, they're not going to. I don't think they're going to follow people who are just about themselves.
I will often think of Judas as possibly a narcissist, but he came from a tribe that was rebellious and they wanted to overthrow Rome. Okay, so when he did so, he was trying to kind of force the hand of Yeshua that he would take over. But it failed because he was never to do that. And so he was manipulating, in my mind, to try to get him to overthrow Rome, overthrow the government. And when that didn't happen, he realized that he was at fault. But it was too late. So I really think that was the whole deal, was because when you read up on his tribe, they were all rebellious for Rome, and they were all basically warriors in the background, rebellious people up against the government. And so I always think of him more like a narcissist. He wanted to control that situation and have Yeshua overthrow the government, and that wasn't going to happen. That's the way he's seen it should happen, but that's not what was in prophecy.
Okay, any other comments? Oh, Lisa.
The comment on external self-awareness I thought was really a key piece, because I think some of us are fairly internally self-aware, but we don't realize how others see us, and that could be quite revealing and help us see things that need to be adjusted.
Well, that's important to being a light in the world, is how other people perceive you and how you come across. And it's hard sometimes to figure that out. That's why we need people who are honest with us and love us, so they can give us some feedback and that we can hear it. Because we can't just be criticized and then the person walk away. That's not beneficial. But to have someone who loves us talk to us and help us or ask, and we learn about ourselves and how we are reflected in other people's eyes. Joel?
Yes, so many people just don't take any stock of themselves, they don't inventory their state of being, and when you take a look at yourself, and that's where you learn those things you were talking about, knowing their internal self, and then, because most people just seems like they go off and just live on emotions, and that's really not the true person. I mean, we can be emotional, but we don't have to respond to it. The way we respond to it makes all the difference, and that's taking charge and taking responsibility for yourself. When you live off your emotions and just fly off the handle, that just throws you off, and you
Yeah.
have to know yourself.
Kevin?
I think it's really helpful that if someone will encourage you, you don't have to be negative to help somebody be self-aware of what someone sees in you. But I think it's so helpful that if people recognize a trait that's good, that they tell you about it, because then you're going to want to do that. And so maybe, it's not eliminating something maybe else that is negative, but you're going to concentrate more on that person really thought this was good and I did this and it was helpful to them. And so I think we need to tell people how much we appreciate what they do that is good,
Yes.
so that is what is accentuated as opposed to a negative thing. If there's something real negative that is a real problem, I guess you have to go there too. But just try to tell people what they did that you were really impressed by.
It encourages you. Yeah, it encourages you
Yes.
to that, well, I'm doing something right. Okay, Keith?
Oh, I forgot what I was going to say. But I will say something else then.
Okay.
I know what I wrote down. You have to be a very secure individual to, was it Josh McDowell? Is that the gentleman? You have to be a very secure individual to give someone the freedom to critique you. That's kind of a rare individual. I mean, we all may say, yeah, feel free whenever, as he presented it to his family. We may say these things, we may even sit here and want that. I'm sure we all want it. It would be a good thing, because no one's perfect, and it's a good thing to be critiqued in certain situations. That could backfire real easy, it seems like to me. But once again, a person that would allow that open critique on a continual basis, on a routine basis, that would have to be a very secure individual in themselves.
Yeah, and you don't just in one sense, a person has to earn the right to critique you in those close situations. You have to know that they have your best interest at heart when you let them tell you. And that's why it's the people who love you, the people you're closest to, that you allow so you say, well, what do you see in me that I need to change? And you're right, you have to be secure in being able to do that. But you can't go just ask somebody that doesn't like you that. That's not a good situation. You're not trying to make it hard on yourself. You're trying to learn and grow from the comments someone who loves you can tell you.
Part of it is using some discernment too. I mean, sometimes you just have to hold your tongue, and because the person that you might be speaking to or might not be ready to hear what you have to say. I mean, they have to have a certain openness, and you have to use what you do know, to curb your tongue a little bit. So, because just pointing it out to them, that doesn't help them. They have to see it for themselves.
Yes.
Another way to put that into perspective, a person has to know that you care about them before they're going to receive any criticism you have for them.
Yes. Jeannie? I'm sorry,
Probably 40 years ago, I went through a chemical dependency treatment program for a week. I was a codependent. My husband was an alcoholic, and I wasn't dealing with things. I was reacting to everything. And the one thing I took away, we had a week's worth of intensive assessment of ourselves. It wasn't an assessment of the person that was influencing us. It was an assessment of ourselves. And on the fourth day, it was just 5 days, and on the fourth day, we had everybody tell us how they thought about us. I mean, it was constant speaking. There was only 10 people in the group, and it was constantly telling different stories about what's happened and how you reacted to it, or what you did with that situation. And so on the 5th day, we had to do a assessment and take the 4th step. Who we owe apologies to, what we've done, you know, and you just drum back to your past. Well, I was a typist, so I typed 15 pages worth. They were just like, but the one thing I brought back from that was, and this was something that they always taught in Al-Anon, to act upon but don't react.
Mhm.
And I thought that was such good wisdom, because I constantly have to remind myself, I might feel my thermometer climbing a little bit by something somebody says that isn't true, but then I have to lower that thermometer and act upon it and offer scripture or whatever it is to show that this is what I see, without them condemning me for the way I believe. And so if I would just react to something that somebody said, I would never get my point across about what I see the truth to be.
Right.
But if I act upon it and find scripture to prove my point, they may have some scripture too, but I don't let that thermometer get away from me anymore. I don't get hot-headed about it. And as I grew up, my dad did that all the time. He was always so hot-headed, and if you disagreed with him, you know, he was going to pound the table and tell you this is the way it is. And so that was something I really took away, and I think that was a good assessment and a good way to be able to evaluate. In a group setting, when you're intensely doing that for 5 days, it's so different than just somebody saying, well, you know, I think you're kind of this way, you're that way. But that intensity, it really builds, and by the 5th day, you're ready to just bleed out and tell everybody everything.
Yes,
Well,
John?
we live in a time where we have a very dysfunctional culture, and dysfunctional people are very much out there doing all kinds of things. Leaders in our culture, in politics and business, people doing those things that they perceive are best for them. Doctors doing all kinds of cesarean section on the women where it would be best for them to allow the women to have natural childbirth and lead them down that direction. So some hospitals have 50% cesarean sections going on. And they should be leading most of those women down the path of natural childbirth. But he's doing it for his own convenience, because he can schedule a time to do that instead of having to stay up 12 hours to do the birth at 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and for his own profit, because they can charge more for a cesarean section than they can for a natural childbirth. And so it's all screwed up, you know, everyone doing those things that are best for them and trying to make the people feel like it's best for them, best for the person. And politics is the same way. Big business is the same way. All the crazy stuff they put in our foods and they allow in our foods, and yet they're doing it for profit, but they're trying to make you think that this is great stuff that they're doing. They're pursuing the profit motive.
Yeah.
Politicians just full of corruption, doing those things best for them, getting rich off their political careers, making deals with foreign countries that are really our enemies, and doing things that they really ought not to be doing. And that's the culture we live in. And so we're not only dysfunctional at the personal levels in the families, and families are dysfunctional all over the place. So are the politics, and so are the leaders that's in front of us in our society and in our culture.
Yeah, well, that's where they're making these decisions, and it's negatively affecting large amounts of people.
I mean, the woke agenda, it's just crazy. And yet that's what they're pushing on even our children in the schools. The schools have become very dysfunctional in this country. And just like the political leaders, it's pushing those agendas. And so we're becoming a dysfunctional nation because of the leaders that's leading this country. And so the people out there in business, they're totally dysfunctional in the way that they run their operations, because it's completely profit motive instead of trying to do those services that are best for the people. They're doing those things that are most profitable for them to do.
Right.
And so we need to be aware of what times we're living in and what's going on around us.
Yeah. Any other? Keith?
I thought about what I was gonna say.
Okay.
I seen a little clip the other night, well, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, where it was two people that were in a, what I'm gonna say, a protest situation in some city. And anyway, the one lady was arguing with the one guy, a liberal versus a conservative, and the liberal lady kept saying, it's not about what's right or wrong, it's not about logic, it's about feelings. It's about how I feel about this situation. That's what's important, not what's right and wrong, not your logic, not the way that you come to these conclusions, but it's about how I feel about this. And I was just, and she was violent for her position, and several of them with her. And I'm not saying anything because the one side was a guy and the other was a female. It didn't have nothing to do with it. But it shocked me to the core that feelings trumped everything else. And that was, we all know how we can feel at times. And we all know that when we get, ratcheted up, logic and truth and common sense most of the time go out the window.
Yes.
So it's really a culture that's, needs Jesus Christ and needs the Torah, needs it that way. And bring us back down and anchor us to what is a sure foundation and what isn't. She's basically standing on sand, sinking sand, and that's it's so bad.
Okay, well, you think we should close? We should close it down now, I guess. Okay.
Whatever.
Any other comments before we close? Okay,